Hello and welcome to today's Product Insight session hosted by CoSoSys. Today, we're going to be talking about how accounting firms can use data loss prevention technologies to protect their most sensitive client data. I'm delighted to be joined, as usual, by Ernest Byrd, one of our DLP specialists here at CoSoSys. And Ernest is actually going to take us through a live product demo of Endpoint Protector. Before we do that, I think it's worth just talking about the challenge a little bit. I think when it comes to data protection, most online research seems to focus on the need for accounting firms to comply with data privacy regulations such as CCPA and GDPR. And while we will cover the need to secure PII data, that's the personal identifiable information of your clients and even your employees, I think the stakes are actually much higher when we look at the other types of data being used by accounting firms. Because accounting firms, like many professional services firms, including law practices and consulting firms, handle enormous amounts of very sensitive client data. Let's take the example of a large accounting firm running annual audits for their corporate clients. The PBC list likely comprises hundreds of documents, from balance sheets to contractual obligations and everything in between. Now, of course, to protect the integrity of your accounting firm, it's important to give clients the assurance that this sensitive data they're sharing with you is safe and protected against loss or accidental disclosure. If it's not, and there is a breach, your firm risks not only regulatory fines, but also reputational harm. So in today's webinar, we're going to look at how DLP, that's data loss prevention technology, can help firms like yours to guard against this loss. In particular, what we call from insider threats. Now, for many, when we talk about data protection, it's easy to think that the principal threat to any company's data is perhaps from external actors trying to gain access to a network and exfiltrating files. The reality is actually very different. In more than half of data loss cases, the cause was actually from an employee. And that's not to say that all insider threats are the result of malicious employee activity, far from it. More often, it's not, it's just accidental. Employees make mistakes as they're handling more and more client and sensitive data. They might share files through channels they shouldn't. By that I mean maybe email or Slack or Microsoft Teams. They might be uploading it to personal cloud storage sites or storing it on removable USB drives. But the end result is the same, right? It can put that data at risk and outside of the control of your company, leaving it and your firm exposed. So we're going to cover some of these scenarios today with Ernest as we run through a demo of Endpoint Protector. So Ernest, can I hand over to you? Maybe we can share your screen and run into the demo.
Yeah, perfect. So definitely really good points that you make mention of, Tim. And what I want to do is emphasize, why DLP is so important as these regulations are continuing to advance for accounting firms, financial consultants, etc. Jumping into the product, what I want to do is I want to show a couple key examples of what you had spoke of and what the overall experience would look like, both from an administrative perspective and also from an end user perspective. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into the management console now. And in showing this specifically allows an administrator to control the overall experience. Now, some of the key points that we talk about are things like IBAN numbers and transfer of that sensitive data. It can also be other PII and financial information, as well as client audit details, pardon me. And what I want to do is look at what that configuration experience looks like first, and then how to protect against that overall leakage. One of the things that's important is we know one USB storage devices allows for portability of that sensitive data. And so in effort to actually put some restrictions around USB storage devices, what you can do is you can come into the solution under our device control selection and implement what would be an enforced encryption strategy. And this allows you to, for portable media, to say, I only want to allow that sensitive data to be transferred to a USB storage device, such as a flash drive, if it's encryption. And we use 256 AES encrypted security for actually protecting that write capability to that media. The other option is to use what would be a read-only complement behind. So if you have some of your personnel or employees that are coming in with their own media already, and you want to allow that for their personal data and visibility, maybe their family pictures as an example, you can allow that read-only capability, but to restrict the write to be encrypted, this is a good support for that. Now,
So that's an interesting one, Ernest. Let me just stop you there, because I know, having worked with accounting firms who are running these big audits, especially pre-COVID, and I'm sure we'll get back to that, when a lot of the auditors are actually visiting the site, right? They're on client premises, and often they're using removable storage devices for the transfer of files, right? Taking them away from the client site back to the office, or vice versa. And I know a lot of companies would just say, well, listen, you just restrict it, block it, right? Don't allow removable devices. But there are certain industries, right, like this one, where actually there are very valid use cases. So we're saying here there's the ability to restrict the actual device types that are being plugged in, right? To sort of mandate that it's only mandated approved devices rather than just personal devices. Is that right?
yeah, so you're actually going a bit further. I want to consider what you just made mention of, an earlier form of DLP strategy. By simply blocking access, you can say now these USB storage devices can't be used at all. And so that becomes, from an admin perspective, one, a burden, because you're going in and you're granting access over time, and effectively it becomes, a very weak strategy. Now having encryption options around this, you're not going in and having to modify for usage of that USB storage, because they're not going away. USB storage devices are another form of, if you would, sneaker net, being able to transfer that. Auditors might need to have that for reports to be transmitted out and not have access to a web setting. And so this is important, I think, to be able to enforce encryption. And by having it naturally available through our product, it's very easy to implement that as well. You're not relying on another third-party encryption utility. Is that what you were looking for,
Yeah,
Tim?
yeah, no, exactly. No, got it. Thanks, Ernest.
Yeah, so some of the things that come in with our enforced encryption strategy, I'll make mention, is you have the ability to enforce the overall user experience requirements if you wanted to have password complexity. This allows you to, without having to intervene or work back and forth with that user, have it where it would be an auto configure type experience. User would simply plug in a USB storage on the first setup. Whatever requirements are staged here in the management console, that would be what they would need to configure in an easy setup wizard. And then the password, the master password, is something that as an administrator, you would have as not necessarily a backdoor, but in the event that the user forgets the password, a way of doing resets. Also being able to do other hardening type variables such as self-destruct on that media should it be lost, stolen, misplaced, I think is very important and a security strategy. So
Okay,
all of
so
this
this,
goes into that portable media.
yeah, so on this enforced encryption, we're basically looking at this from this is software-based encryption, because I know a lot of firms are using, the hardware-based encryption, the Apricorn, removable USB drives, right? So we're saying rather than that, we can actually apply a software-based encryption on a standard USB storage device.
Yes, it would be portable as well, where you could have it with the USB directly or agent based. But in short, yes, it's more of a software based encryption strategy unique to the USB storage device, not the entire operating system.
Got it.
Now, getting in a little bit further, some of the other key points you had talked about. One, what would the sensitive data how would that appear to be protected? One, how is it identified? And maybe in that order change, we would look at how it's identified first, and that would be simply through a policy. So coming in here, being able to create a predefined policy. We have all of these inbuilt. So looking at accounting firms and consulting divisions as it relates to financial, you simply check a radio box and it allows you to focus on specific PII information or IBAN information. And what that does in short is it creates for you a policy without having to go in and looking at all the granular options and selecting. It keeps the checks a little bit more minimal. So here it builds out based on all predefined logic for you, what would be predefined content. And that could include IBAN information, credit card information. And these are simply patterns that are relative to given regions. So once this is created, you set up the overall experience, whether it be blocking or blocking with a bypass option even. And so this allows you to now through a given browser or through browsers say, I'm monitoring this traffic. Let me go ahead and restrict that from leaving. And we'll look at an exercise both through a Chrome browser to a Dropbox share, and we'll also look at through Outlook.
So on some of those, on just before you do that, Ernest, so I just want to drill into that because you looked at some of those pre-built libraries, right? And when I first introed this, I spoke about sensitive client files coming in, but I think any industry in addition to that has to think about PII, which is going to sit outside of those sensitive files. Those sensitive files are client confidential, but they're not necessarily PII, and we'll come on to those in a minute. But from a PII perspective, it's everything, as you say, from even employee social security numbers, right, all the way through to client data like email addresses, billing addresses, and then I guess into the company information, maybe tax IDs and IBANs, etc. So this is allowing a very quick way of building those policies against predefined libraries of criteria, right?
Exactly. So the predefined, I would suggest, is more regulatory focus. It's broad strokes where you're looking at social security numbers by a given region, address information, etc. But going into custom content now, having client audit files as a given example in this, by predefining like a name format for some of these files or content that that would exist within, you can attach that just the same as other regulatory variables and treat that just the same. It is sensitive. And that's the terminology first to say what is important to you as an organization. And based on that, now you get to make sure that that is not going out by certain parties, certain departments, groups, etc., where others might need that in a role or a function.
Perfect. And you may come on to this in a little bit, Ernest. I don't want to preempt your demo flow, but your mouse is literally hovered over it at the moment, which is block and remediate. I wonder if you could just explain what the difference is. What do we mean by remediate?
Yeah, so some of the default actions you'll see here available are the report only, block only, or block and report. One of our more premium features allows for what would be a complement to our offline temporary password method for an administrator request to do a bypass. Let's say it's needed in a given role to transmit this in one given scenario. What can be done is a bypass with a justification reason can be submitted from the user. That would then be reported into the dashboard with a justification code. Therefore, it requires less admin intervention.
Got it. Okay, so this is just about cutting down, as you say, some of that admin control of employees wondering why certain actions have been blocked, but it's all time stamped, right? So there's still that audit trail of activity. I always give that example of I'm trying to print my boarding pass, right? But I've got a policy. There's a data protection policy in place that says block if there's a passport number being shared. I'm trying to print my boarding pass. It blocks it because of that, but I've got a flight to catch, right? It's a legitimate reason. I can use a user remediation to get through that policy. Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, so I want to say that, earlier instances of DLP strategies, it was more painful for administrators because of needing to do a lot more of that configuration and arrears, those emergency scenarios, exactly as what you just described. And so this alleviates a lot of that burden while producing greater auditability, visibility on those bypass scenarios where they're generally not frequent. But in this scenario where they are occurring, it would be more of an emergency. The other piece is, having a reporting strategy initially, and this is something that we might encourage early on, is to actually be able to see what would be the standard behaviors of your employees, being able to then define before a blocking strategy the best possible configuration, minimizing any disruption for production. So a two-phase approach can be accomplished very easily by having a policy built report only strategy and then toggling here just after doing initial review of the reporting to a blocking strategy. So in a given scenario where you want to prohibit the transmit, I'll use an example here. I've staged some files that, or let's say client audit files. And if I wanted to transmit this out and this were to be something that is more privied upon role or limited in the organization role to be able to have access to, then I would not be able to transmit this out of this port. So let me go ahead and go through that example. So as you can see, I'm immediately presented with a blocking message. Now in the given scenario where I do need to transmit this and it's more of that kind of emergency scenario, I can submit an authorize and a justification reason. The details here would be authorized. Now I'm able to do a bypass based on that time period of that given object stream.
Got it. And that same experience, I mean, you've given the example of, someone trying to load a file up to a cloud storage device, but that same experience and pop-up and effectively employee experience, that would be the same if, as long as the policy had been configured that way to look at sharing through email, for example, if I was looking to attach a file, I guess, but we're having to manage those exit points through the policy, right? So we can actually determine which exit points are prohibited and not.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you have a common applications that you want to put restrictions on, I would say have well over 100 entries, but major browsers, email, messaging clients, cloud services, etc. The more you select, of course, the broader it is in terms of those restrictions, but it allows for granularity. So you can open it or close it based on the role in the department and then based on the applications as well.
Yeah, and that's useful, I think, because a lot of, certainly, in the post-pandemic world, a lot more organizations are relying on collaboration apps, right, just to keep their teams together. And it's not just sending things via email anymore. It's using a Slack or a Microsoft Teams. So yeah, I think the ability to apply a policy to those very frictionless channels that we all have now, right? We're just sharing information. It's really simple to do. So having that backup and protections are really, really useful.
So as you had mentioned Outlook, I'll go into what would be an Outlook blocking strategy upon a send attempt here. Very same, and that I would get a blocking message. And if I wanted to simply navigate out, even that action still logged. From an administrator standpoint, it's good to see that those attempts are made. And based on that, there's still some validity and able to, from an audit perspective, go in deeper and see what kind of patterns are occurring amongst a given user department. Maybe it's as simple as taking the rights away for that content for that department.
Got it. I'm just going to remind the attendees, because I forgot to do it at the start of the webinar. Please do ask questions. Please do put your questions in, and we'll get to them either through as we're going through the demo, if it makes sense, or at the end. One of them's just come through, and actually I was going to ask it now because I just saw it on your previous screen, Ernest. We had a question about, we're talking about the electronic transfer, but what's to stop people just doing a screen print onto the clipboard or printing material? Again, in a lot of industries, printing and in particular, or just making screenshots could be a risk. So that's one of the questions that's just come in, and I thought I saw it on this screen, so I thought maybe rather than wait till the end, it was a good time to ask it.
Yeah, so print screen very easily in the policy, you're able to go in, select that, and present a restriction so that sensitive data is not being captured and sent out. Alongside of that, I think clipboard's another item that's worth pointing out. The paste restriction, if you're taking it from one application or let's say a browser to another local, we have the ability to set restrictions within clipboard so that you're not able to circumvent any of these systems also.
Perfect. And the same applies for printing. Did we cover that? I think.
Printers
Yeah.
as well. So we have
Yeah.
printers, the to and from restrictions amongst network shares, and even as you can see here, storage devices. So this is really where we've evolved the device control strategy and being able to control at unique device levels to external media as a given example, the storage devices. And you can restrict it from going for the physical. So I like to think of this as like hard ports, where the applications might be your soft ports, and all based on what you deem as sensitive through these patterns or denial list strategies.
Perfect. Thank you, Ernest.
Now, another thing I think is important is talking about the at-rest data. Things that we've focused on right now are some strategies I see more commonly with device control and the encryption strategies, which complement really well the actual detection of certain data types, both in motion. So what we've looked at here is active level protection, and then at rest. Now our e-discovery solution, what that allows for is a broader determination. Where does that sensitive data live? And then based on that, you're able to go in and do deletion of that data, thereby removing the risk altogether. Or you can set an encryption on that data set so that it's not readily accessible. Again, overall removing the risk for any specific malicious attempts to take that information outside of the organization, or what we focus on is exfiltration. So the method that we offer here for e-discovery is for any system where an agent's present, Windows, Mac, Linux. And I should also go back and make mention that we offer 0-day coverage for Mac and Windows. And for the Mac side, there's no parity gaps between that and Windows. So whether you're a Mac only shop, Windows only combination, or even have Linux, you're not losing functionality in your DLP strategy. We have a very broad array of coverage, and then the application coverage based on the operating system variant. So here you would define, much like a content aware protection policy, you would define a strategy for your e-discovery, going in and set what is important, what is deemed sensitive, and then based on that, you're going to set up these scans to either be like one-off full scan, or you can set up to be incremental. And so incremental might be something that you do every couple of weeks, and your initial scan might just be the first baseline scan, and then you do that once a quarter. But in essence, what it does is it takes some of the pressure, if you would, on the active level protections, thereby, again, reducing risk, getting visibility on that, and then being able to respond appropriately.
Okay, that makes sense. So just so I understand it, so when we talk about content aware protection, we're talking about data that's moving and being used. So an employee is trying to share it, trying to send it to somebody through a particular channel. When we talk about e-discovery, that's data that's at rest, right? It's not moving, but perhaps as an organization, I'll give the example again of the prepared by client lists. And again, having worked in the accounting industry myself, I know many instances where all those hundreds of PBC files that are coming through are often just emailed, right? Often just emailed to an administrator or an auditor, and often they just sit. They just sit there. Okay, they may be uploaded, but a copy of that file sits on a C drive or in a mail account, and it just sits there on the laptop, forgotten about. And that's what I think we call this latent data threat. That it's not about anybody trying to immediately exfiltrate that information, but having that data present on a machine is a risk in itself. If that laptop is stolen or it's lost, even just from a compliance perspective, should you be storing client PII or client confidential records, perhaps after an audit or a contract with a client has been completed, should you be having that information stored and forgotten about on somebody's C drive? So I think that's a really useful feature just in terms of that data governance that every organization, regardless of industry, should be thinking about.
Yeah, definitely. I would say, again, a very good complementive strategy to what DLP needs have evolved to, and that is more precisely, getting away from just simply controlling access to a device, but going a step further, finding out what kind of data is living within that environment. And if you don't have a need for it, get rid of it.
Yeah.
The main thing is that's where the big calls come into play, the litigation calls and the out of audit kind of breach scenario calls come about. And so I think it's important to have a very complementary strategy looking at what DLP needs are in the industry today.
Yeah, agree. And even just thinking, I mean, you've just reminded me of something, thinking of that. We don't like to think about our employees moving on, and moving to other jobs. But the fact is, at the moment, I think what is the term that everybody uses? The great resignation. I think it is more such a high turnover of staff happening at the moment. And even some of these scenarios you've just spoken about, having data at rest on an employee laptop who's going to be leaving in the next week, right? Do we want that there? Do we want to give the employee the chance to actually upload that to a USB drive and take it away with them? Of course we don't, right? So organizations absolutely have to start responding and using this technology, not just as a sledgehammer, right, but as a bit of a sniper rifle to really understand some of these threats that are becoming more prevalent to their organization.
Exactly.
Okay, good. Sorry, we kind of led astray a little bit there, Ernest. But did we get to the end of that demo, or was there anything else that you wanted to cover?
No, I think that covers the core fundamentals as it relates to the accounting firms and
Perfect.
consulting division. So I think with that, Q&A would be most appropriate if there's any other
Yeah.
standing questions.
Yeah, we've got a few, and everybody do please drop your questions in. But let me just summarize. So we essentially went over a few key modules there, right? We started off with the device control, right? And that was basically that ability for an organization to, and I'm going to put this into layman's terms, Ernest, so forgive me. That's the ability for an organization to decide what's plugged into an employee endpoint effectively, right? There may be use cases. I may want to allow my employees to plug their smartphones in so they can charge them, for example. But I don't want them to have USBs in where I know information could be moved to. Or I may decide that that feature is only enabled. I may want my audit team who are on a client site to have that feature, but not people based in an office. Or I may have a set of approved, mandated USBs, company issued USB storage devices that can be used and nothing else. So that was really that device control piece, right? Plugging things that are plugged into the machine. And off the side of that, you spoke about the enforced encryption, right, which was a layer on top of that that says if we are allowing devices to be plugged in for storage, if content's being moved to them, we are going to apply a level of encryption to that content, right, in case of loss or theft or so forth. Then we moved on to the content aware protection, right, and that was that, if you remember, that was the data being used, right? Employees just want to get their work done, right? It's very easy for me to sit here and chat with my colleagues. I have colleagues like yourself. We're on completely different continents, you and I, Ernest. I may use Slack and drop a file into Slack and say, hey, check this out, or use Teams or email or something. And actually, I'm just trying to get my work done. But in terms of data governance, it's probably not a sensible idea. I don't know who else is part of that channel we're communicating on. There's sensitive information. It may breach data privacy acts, or it's just not good practice to be sharing client files that way. And then the final part was the e-discovery, which is not content being moved, right? But it's just sitting there. It's kind of that dumb file. It's just sat there. Somebody's probably forgotten about it. Archived reports, client information that at the end of any audit, we may have a contractual obligation to ensure all of that information is removed, right? So the ability to just go and do a scan and make sure all copies of that file have been removed at the end of an audit period covers that use case as well. So with that, and thank you for giving us that demo, Ernest, we've got a couple of questions here which I'd like to cover. I think the first one, the most interesting one for me here, really talks again. We said DLP should be really focused on some of the changing use cases in modern workplaces, and one of those, we can't have that discussion without talking about the hybrid work mode, right? A lot of accounting firms, embraced the remote work shift after the sort of post pandemic, and many have stayed right with a more of a hybrid mode. So employees are spending a couple of days in the office, a couple of days at home, at the client site, wherever it may be. So there's a question here about, in that case, if employees are working at home or remotely anywhere and they go offline, how on earth can you actually provide data protection in that scenario if they're in an offline mode and just pulled the plug?
Well, that's the beauty of having an endpoint-based DLP solution. And so what that means in a simple form is the policy resides with the system, the control resides with the system. So not having network connectivity at a given point in time is not an issue. What will occur in that given scenario is auditability, everything is still captured based on whatever methods are attempted to transmit that data. And if a policy update is needed, quite simply, it would be necessary to communicate back to the dashboard for any changes. However, by having bypass options, that can even be done in an offline scenario. So you can account for no gaps in DLP coverage. You can also account for that emergency scenario, even in an offline setting, with a few different around options that need to be set up in order to do a bypass. But we've thought a lot about that to make sure that remote work scenarios or lack of network connectivity scenarios are not disregarding DLP coverage at all.
Got it. Thank you. Question around deployment, whether this is a on-premise, a cloud-based solution, how does it actually work?
Whatever your setting is, generally we can accommodate, and we also offer SaaS models. So in short, I like to think of it in three different ways. Virtualization options, Hyper-V, VMware, or other virtual stack. If you want to have that as an on-prem, you have the ability. If you want to put it in your own cloud stack, so AWS, GCP, Azure, we provide the blob, the image, you spin it up as an admin. Now you're managing it quite similar to an on-prem, but in a cloud or off-site scenario, or our SaaS model, where we can make the network infrastructure, everything spun up and available to you as an admin, and use the management console, deploy your agents out to your systems, and we can accommodate in short all of those settings. So I don't think we're missing anything.
Good. Have a question here. I think we actually covered this. The question was around the use. We've got an attendee whose firm is using the hardware-based encrypted USB drive. So it was just a clarification question that they wouldn't need to use those anymore. Enforced encryption would basically just be a software approach to it instead, right? Rather than those hardware-based encrypted USBs. If I think I'm understanding the question
So I
correctly.
want to say in short, I mean, we offer enforced encryption as an encryption solution for that USB storage device type. But if you already have another enforced encryption strategy in place, we offer integrations with these other vendors as well.
Right.
So quite simply, we can adhere to whatever is configured in that environment. All in all, it's just based on the experience. You're not able to write and transmit unless it's encrypted. And so what that does is make sure, again, if that device is lost, stolen, misplaced, sensitive data doesn't go with it.
Got it. One more, I think, clarification question that's just come through. It was talking about when you were building that content-aware protection policy, you went through some of those predefined libraries, and they were sort of, a lot of them were based around PII, and I think that's important to reference as well, that we are maintaining those libraries of information to ensure that you are compliant with those data privacy regulations in different regions. So that's, again, a burden taken away, that we're maintaining those libraries. But I think it's a clarification question of what's the difference between building the policy around that and maybe that sort of custom protection against particular client files, and how that could be achieved. Is it through, perhaps, can we tag documents, or is it looking at the content or known formats of documents, such as spreadsheets, or is it looking at typical patterns or strings of patterns in terms of the content within files? What are the different ways that we could build those custom policies?
So some of the examples that are pointed out there, file types as a key example. We offer many different file types to accommodate different industry sectors. And so if you wanted to simply say, this is the file type or the extension being used, block at this level, you could do so. If you want to go a little bit deeper, you get into what could be source code, and source code and specific language types could be identified. The predefined is that next level, but then we go further to the right, if you would, and that's where added granularity can be achieved. So it could be what would be like a fingerprint concept, a document match. If it looks like this is what it needs to be blocking against, essentially. And you can define that by uploading one of those structural files. Then even further, we go into what would be regular expression capability. And so this is getting into more formula-based control and being able to define that. But then what we've added even recently is logical operations, being able to complement things. So you can have a pattern type and another variable type combined that says, now this is sensitive. So the world's really at your fingertips in terms of your capabilities. If you can talk it, you can build it, or we can offer that pre-built for you. And we make it very easy, very turnkey, along with an intuitive admin interface to deliver these strategies.
I think that actually that last comment you made is really important, and I want to echo that, which is the ease of use of this, right? You know, and that extends. It's not just the administrative console, right? It's built, and when we build these products, it's thinking about the users. Admins, IT admins have a tough enough job as it is, right, in their day-to-day. The last thing anybody wants to be doing is adding to their workload with false positives or disgruntled employees, right? So we make everything as simple and efficient and frictionless as possible. But it also extends to even our customer success team, right? So when we talk about, as you just said, Ernest, logical operators and that more advanced way of building policies, rather than just clicking a box and saying, well, I just want to block a credit card number or a tax ID or something. I want to actually build custom policies. We have that customer success team, right, that are working with our customers, with our clients, to actually help build and guide them through that process. But listen, we've come to the end of our time. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. If we didn't get to your question, we will respond. We'll reach out to you via the email that you registered to join the webinar with. in the next day or so, and we'll come back with an answer. But I want to thank you, Ernest, for joining me today and giving us that demo and giving us some of your experience. And obviously, thank you to all of today's attendees for joining. Hope that was useful. If you'd like to learn more, obviously do check out endpointprotector.com. We do regular webinars, regular information. There's lots of white papers and assets for you to download. So until then, thank you for joining. Thank you, Ernest, and we're going to close the webinar right now. Thank you.